Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Machine Gun Kelly called Bloom. But first, let's talk about selling out. Because while I've opened up reviews with this topic before, I think a refresher is in order. And to make this abundantly clear, going pop or changing your genre and style isn't in and of itself selling out. Just because an act goes for what's deemed a more accessible sound isn't inherently bad if the core of what made a specific act unique and special remains, instead of just nakedly following commercial trends, less because you're going to do anything interesting with them, and more because it's guaranteed to produce a hit of dubious quality. And you know what, even then, it's not inherently a bad thing for an artist to want to cash in and make some money, and some acts only discover their pop appeal when they try this. My point is that selling out is often a misused term. It's not always inherently a bad thing. With Machine Gun Kelly, it was a bad thing. Look, I'll admit right now, I was never really a huge fan of this Cleveland MC. I always tended him to slot him in the Tech 9 mold of cranking out impressive flows and delivery, but saddled with production that was either too thin or flimsy to back up its pretensions to bombast, and it could also slide towards corniness or some utterly whack bars. But even then, I'm a sucker for a good flow. And while his full-length debut album, Lace Up, was pretty far from great, especially compared to his mixtapes, it was overlong, his reliance on crass party bangers that he didn't have the personality or wordplay to really back up, that kind of let the album down, there were definitely moments of flow and energy I could appreciate. Now, most of this went right out the window for his second album, General Admission, which aimed to play darker and more personal, but also did so by compromising his delivery and slowing it down, and much of the intensity that made his early work at least pretty likable for me. There are a few choice tracks and stories being told that I don't mind, but when you factored in the production, he wasn't doing anything any number of more aggressive, insightful, and honest MCs didn't do already. And that's before you got to that god-awful Kid Rock collaboration. And then bad things happened, which is apt in both referring to the god-awful duet with Camila Cabello of Fifth Harmony and the likely trajectory of Machine Gun Kelly's career, because thanks to 2016 giving a pass to entirely too many boring white rappers in the mainstream, Machine Gun Kelly, he got his breakthrough with his most pop-accessible flows and least interesting content to date. In other words, I was expecting Bloom to suck. I gotta be honest with that. And I'm only really covering it because at least it looks shorter than his last two albums, and because I need to get it off my schedule on Patreon so I can eventually cover Perfume Genius or something. So, on that promising note, what did I find off of Bloom? Well, okay, there are three ways to really consider this out. The first is if you're the average mainstream listener who only knows Machine Gun Kelly from Bad Things, or maybe that other single, At My Best, where you'd probably find this below average with some jaw-dropping low points. The second is if you've heard Machine Gun Kelly since his albums started dropping, and you'd probably consider this a shocking drop-off in quality that not only squanders his potential, but shows him embracing the absolute worst parts of his persona. Now, the third group is if you've been listening to Machine Gun Kelly's mixtapes since then, and unless you're a die-hard fan completely devoid of self-awareness, this record will make you want to set things on fire. Folks, I may have expected this to be bad from the stuff I had heard off of his first two albums, but Bloom will likely go down as one of the worst albums that I've had the misfortune to cover this year. An album that alternates between selling out and selling out hard, and some of the most stunningly misconceived hip-hop fusions with other genres that I've heard in some time. Let's make no mistake here, let's make this abundantly clear, this is bad. But what's unnerving is that with this progression to get to this point, I get the feeling that any future album is only going to get even worse. And what we need to start with is Machine Gun Kelly himself. And if you want to call sellout on anything, it's calling it on him, because this is a shocking drop-off in terms of his delivery and bars. I mean, what happened to the guy who could flow at least as quick as Tech 9 or Twist on Laced Up? I'm hearing none of that speed or intensity, or indeed much intensity at all. And it's not like this record isn't going for that sort of bombast on songs like the opener, The Gunner, which is probably the best song here, with all those ominous piano lines and abrasive synths and noisy drums and guitar smolder and gunshots. Granted, when you have Machine Gun Kelly rapping about being a trending topic on that song, it's a little bit hard to really buy into it, but there is at least a hint that some of the intensity might be there, maybe below the surface, but he's bringing none of the tempo consistently. By the time we hit the lumbering Wake and Bake, the very next song that tries for blues guitar and yet has none of the groove, Machine Gun Kelly is rapping in one of his most basic, boring flows yet, which is later mirrored on the clusterfuck of degenerating chiptune and reverb of Can't Walk, with somehow even less energy. But nothing is quite so bad as when he wants to sing. Quite frankly, if he's struggling to convey charisma when he's rapping, he's projecting nothing as a singer, either opposite James Arthur on Go for Broke, or the auto-tuned hook on The Closer 27 with the added stuttering on Kiss the Sky, or the utterly god-awful vocals on Rehab and Let You Go that don't even try to hide how flat and inert they are here. In comparison, I wasn't really a huge fan of Yelawolf's weak singing voice either back on Love Story. It was the biggest problem with that album, but at least Yelawolf's rasp was moderately convincing. He was going to amp up the tempo and intensity when the song actually demanded it, and he didn't rely on so much flagrant, disgusting autotune. And granted, when you have singers like Camila Cabello on Bad Things who could actually use some of that autotune not to sound painfully thin in the upper register, you almost wish that there actually was some, at least for that. But that's more of an issue of the production and the instrumentation, and I don't even know where to start with this mess, because this is some of the most slapdash mixing and malform ideas I've heard on a hip-hop record in some time, if you can even call it that. Now, to go back to Yelawolf's Love Story again, he knew enough that when you want your hook to stand out on his country rap fusion, you need to give your guitars the body and swell to supplement your beats. Whereas with Machine Gun Kelly, we get the classic case of percussion over any sort of melody, which certainly does not help any of these hooks really gain swell or momentum that they don't really have to begin with. Again, a major issue here is tempo. I was kind of grooving to the smoky blues of Wake and Bake and some of the guitars before your by-the-numbers fizzy trap hi-hats come in too slow and too stodgy to work whatsoever. And that's providing you actually get a melody at all, as Golden God is a rattling trap beat and bass with fragments of faded vocals and piano trying to give the song any sort of real dramatic weight, as of course they put a filter on Machine Gun Kelly's voice to make him sound a little bit more intimidating, or at least try, because it doesn't work. Similar issue on the discordant train wreck of Can't Walk. I think the dead-eyed delivery and distorted screams against the blubbery bass and trap beat is supposed to sound somewhat intimidating or cool for being this screwed up for multiple days at a time, but it really sounds a lot more like the montage of the rock star overdosing and choking on his own vomit. It's a disgusting song. It doesn't work at all. And that's where we get to Rehab and Let It Go, which decide that super clean guitar lines, and in the latter case one that feels jacked from a bad Weezer album, that shifted to these weak beats midway through count as actual quality here? And that's where we get to the piano ballads of 27 and Kiss the Sky, or the utterly forgettable come up self-esteem percussion over melody mainstream pop songs, or Go for Broke, or Bad Things, and At My Best. The larger issue is though coming in the compositions, namely how underwritten they feel. Often we get two verses, two hooks, that's probably about it. No bridge, no significant change-ups, no solos. Okay, maybe a guitar solo that sounds like it belongs on a mid-period Poison album, but it's underwritten as all hell. Even Trap Paris with Quavo and Ty Dolla $ign, there's only two forgettable verses, one from MGK, one from Quavo. I might have some issues with Moonwalkers with Dub Double X, but at least feels a little bit more opulent in the chimes and the blubbery trap beat, even if it is basically Machine Gun Kelly riding the Migos flow, with such lines like sex tape like it's porn. No, really? Yeah, might as well get into the content here. And if there is an area where I can see MGK hardcore fans really turning on this album, it's here. Because let me say this, at least for general admission, I can at least respect it for a few potent, grimy stories that didn't shy away from the unpleasant details and left things marginally feeling personal. That's effectively gone on Bloom, as Machine Gun Kelly alternates between getting wasted in his success and knocking out increasingly stale themes or increasingly corny punchlines. At My Best is an utterly mediocre self-esteem anthem fodder that I already took apart on Billboard Breakdown, but it's not like Go for Broke is anything more than a self-aggrandizing and rather kind of obnoxious come-up story, or that Golden God is trying to be so powerful and striking and imposing, describing himself as the David Bowie of his generation. Not a fucking chance. And then he says that he's a golden god, and he's almost famous, as he also describes as being the king of the underground and retarded, and at some point you just stop taking it seriously at all. But it gets a lot worse when he's trying to muster something close to a romantic sentiment, like on Rehab, where it starts off with him wanting to reunite with his girl despite killing his pain with plenty of strippers, and then devolves into a confused showcase of vulnerability and thinking maybe it wasn't supposed to work out and thus everything is okay, and he's so happy happy now, and I don't buy it at all from his delivery, which offers no real resolution here. Or take Let You Go, which seems to be trying to have him as the guy who gets left behind by a girl after a one-night stand, which kind of contradicts the whole alpha male bruiser image that he's trying for in the rest of the album, but okay, whatever, thematic consistency's gone on this project. And then there are the points that are trying to be more sensitive and vulnerable, like 27, where he muses about dying young and his need to write so much so he can overdose on inspiration. Oh, gross. Or on Kiss the Sky, where he tries to use a few space metaphors to write himself a confessional story to win back a lover. Not only does it end up feeling like he's only feeding his ego more, he also wants the world, but nothing in specific, which probably is very telling why there are so few actual details to these stories. Not even really stories, we don't really get much of a narrative here at all. But you know what, the line that jumped out to me the most came on Moonwalkers, one of the few passable songs here, where Machine Gun Kelly compared his jacket to that of Elvis. And you know what, it got me thinking, how white rappers like Eminem have compared themselves to Elvis in order to highlight and then satirize his usage of hip-hop, a black art form, being a white man, or in even bleaker details on songs like Deja Vu, paralleling Elvis's own drug abuse to match his own. Whereas Machine Gun Kelly uses the Elvis comparison for his jacket. That's it, no additional commentary. And that's when it hit me. We're dealing with an artist that, in order to appeal to the mainstream, has sloughed off the majority of his talent and his personality to a more basic form that's a lot less appealing. And considering what's left would make him sound like what Kid Rock would be making if he rapped in 2017, that's not a good sign. And that's not even getting into the flubbed rhymes, or that blurred lines reference on Can't Walk that probably wasn't intending to sound as rapey as it did. Ugh, you know what? This was a gross listen. It's by far Machine Gun Kelly's worst project. Netting a 3 out of 10 from me and absolutely no recommendation. I have heard better hip-hop this year. Hell, I've heard better rap rock this year. Whereas this, it's sloppy, it's lazy, and a waste of an otherwise promising talent. You are capable of so much better, and I've heard it before. In other words, skip this trash. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. You know, I have no idea how people are going to feel about this. I haven't really gotten much in terms of requests to review it beyond Patreon. And really, it hasn't had a huge buzz, so not a lot of people are really talking about it, and the people who are aren't saying good things. So, you never know what happens. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my Patreon so I don't have to cover crap like this, link's right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on the albums coming up, and once per week the higher tiers get to add albums or even movies to my schedule. Beyond that, if you guys have disagreements with me, polls right there, tell me how wrong I am, although I don't think I am in this case. And if you guys want to buy the record, if anything I described maybe satisfies your morbid curiosity, link's right there. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.